deeply.
In about 4 seconds, a teacher will begin to speak.
I think very deeply.
Peace and love. You are now listening to Adult Public Health Podcast, and I'm your host, Demonte. And as always, this is a safe space where we lead with grace and we're always open to learning. And today I'm joined by Dr. Ritch Hall II. Sir, how are you? How are you? Welcome.
Doing great, doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. Super excited to have you here. We're just briefly speaking, the slogan, that we've coined here is where creativity meets advocacy. And I just wanted to jump right in. Like,
hmm
I came across you and your work through TikTok, and like this is like for me the first time I've been able to reach out to somebody that's doing this work, especially specializing like you specialize in African American cultural things, like you have this knowledge, but TikTok literally led me to your work. So talk to me
Yeah,
about how you've woven this avenue into your practice.
yeah. Well, one of the things that I noticed is when you do this work for long enough, you find yourself repeating yourself
Okay.
all the time. You just find that just throughout the same day or within a week, you will have given the same piece of advice multiple times to multiple people. And at some point,
Wow.
you kind of want to get everybody in a room
Okay.
to tell them the same thing. But because of HIPAA and privacy, and I just don't have the administrative skills yet to pull off a group therapy. And I was like, well, why don't I just do some TikToks? And I had another thing where I'm working with someone who's creating an app for mental health, and they had asked if I could do TikToks for the app.
Mm-hmm.
The Dial app, it's supposed to be launching, I think, on May 15th. And when they asked, I was like, I don't know how to do a TikTok. I had not even delved into
Wow.
it at all. Um, I had done some podcasting and some things like that. I had been on the news, but TikTok seemed like a different
Yeah.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
mechanism. Like there's just a different tempo to it. It reminds me more of like Vine in a way that people are just putting out content. It's often short
Yes.
form. It can be long form. And so I knew that in order to delve into that for this app thing, I needed to like acclimate myself to what it meant to make a TikTok. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I did a couple recordings for them, and then I did a couple recordings for myself just to see if I felt comfortable doing it, and
Gotcha.
then did the recordings for them and was like, well, now that I've done some of these, let me try and just keep making my own.
Yeah.
And so it's so far, it's been actually really good for marketing. Like I've gotten some clients who've said, I saw you on TikTok, I'd like to work with you. And it's led to other opportunities and such. And so it ended up just being a good idea that I
Yeah.
just kind of just like I said, somebody else asked me to do it for something else,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, well, let me try it out and see. And I, because of some of the things I'd done in my background, I have like a high production standard. So I'm often like battling with this internal creative voice that is like, no, they
Okay.
kind of look perfect, sound perfect.
Yes.
Lighting needs to be good. Uh, and I've, in fighting that, I just kind of just put something out, see what happens, say
Mm-hmm.
some nice things. My main mission with it is to sort of just add positivity and good information to the world,
Mm-hmm.
um, and hopefully to provide people at least some access to what this therapy thing is, because a lot of people just they don't have the exposure to it, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of stigma around it, a lot of just poor ideas around what it is. It's reducing. A lot of the stigma isn't as prevalent as it used to be, but
Yeah.
it's still there.
I definitely agree with that. And as somebody who I work with young adults as well, and just
hmm
getting people to begin to shift their mindset because, like you said, the stigma is reducing. I can now broach the subject of therapy with some of the young adults I work with because of this great idea. I can like, you know
hmm
what? Okay, you think therapy looks like this, but did you know that therapists like this exist? And it really
Yes.
it opens up the door for
Right.
young adults that I support that they wouldn't have. They're like, yeah, I know therapy, but now
Yeah.
like I'm just grateful for what you're doing because it's opening up doors and you're helping people even from afar. So
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. It's one of those things where I say it's like sending out carrier pigeons. Like you're just sending a
hmm
message out to the void, hoping that it reaches somewhere it's supposed to. You're going to get a lot of whatever back. You get weird comments, you get all the things that happen when you're on the internet.
right.
But so far, it's been pretty like people seem to be interested in just positive messages, uplifting messages, that sort of thing, just because I think there is so much noise in society right now.
For sure. And like, take us back. How did you first, this journey into mental health? How did this begin for you?
Yeah, so originally, I when I was young, I wanted to be a therapist. So I can say like
Okay.
my desire. Somebody told me there was a job where you just listen to people, help them solve problems, and um, they would be they would pay you to have an office with a plant in it and
Nice.
a I liked listening to people. I was very much an introvert.
Hmm.
So I liked listening to people. I liked helping people solve problems. And so it was either going to be private detective or therapist.
Nice. That's a nice contrast there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but
There's like
also I feel
some
like
similarities there.
there's a similarity between the two jobs, except therapist is with a person, one person per hour, trying to solve the mystery of why they are the way they
For
are.
sure.
But no, so since like seventh or eighth grade, I had this desire to be a therapist without any real knowledge of what it meant to
Really?
be that.
Wow.
Just I had this idea, like I
Hmm.
think people have said therapist. That sounds like it fits me. What does that mean? And then got to college and met my first mentor, Dr. Ken G, who was the first male Black psychologist I had ever seen in life.
Wow.
And he was a professor who like rapped in class and
Nice.
would use Simpsons clips to tell stories and help people understand psychological concepts.
Hmm.
So his class was the class everybody wanted to take. I remember my college counselor said, "You got to take Dr. G's class. Do that." So even though it was Psych 102, I took it first, and
Wow.
it was just
Okay.
introduced to once again this different version of psychology where a person that looks like me,
Hmm.
like I still talk to this dude today. He reminds me of like one of my uncles. He's still super educated, super dynamic,
Hmm.
but and he was also like willing to let me come to his office and just talk to him about my thoughts and ideas and so he's remained someone who I could count on through most of my career. If I need counsel, I could
Wow.
still go to him. So the idea of having access to someone who looks like me suddenly made the dream much more real than it
Yeah.
was just I'm going to go to college. I'm going to flounder for a while until I meet this professor. And then I'm like, oh, this is a real path.
Hmm.
And all I got to do is keep doing what he says, find other people who are doing things down the line. So for me, mentorship was like one of the key things that helped me figure the path out when by myself, I had never met a Black doctor,
Yeah.
before that, or definitely not a Black male doctor. And so, yeah, in college and undergrad, that was when I kind of really got on the path. Still kind of floundered a little bit, but then at some point was like, I got to get my stuff together, and graduated with honors in the psychology department. My
Hmm.
other grades were, yeah. And then worked for a little while, and then was working at a child care facility, an orphanage in the city
Hmm.
for like 4 or 5 years, and just was getting frustrated with the system and the way the system is often very like limiting, particularly when you
Understood.
just don't have credentials.
Right.
And was like, nope, I got to go back and get that PhD that I said I would get because I see things not working the way I think they should work. And so, just with just enough hubris to push me back into academia
Okay.
uh, and to get that PhD, once again, because of two of my mentors, Dr. John Thomas and Dr. Kathy Berlew. Dr. John Thomas was a mentor who was helping me. He was the first Black male therapist I'd learned. So I met a Black male psychologist who was a social psychologist and taught psychology. Then I
Hmm.
met Dr. John Thomas, who was a Black male therapist. And it was like, oh, this is even closer to what I want to be.
Yeah.
Both of them Kappa brothers. So they had that in common. My dad's a Kappa. I did not pledge fraternity because it was offline when I was in college. But you know what I mean? Like these are
Yeah.
cultural things that I understand. And so these people are not now just like on this hill where I can't reach them. They're people that I feel like I know or can get to know,
Yeah.
which made it easier for me to see myself on that same path.
Yeah. And there's a lot of power in what you said about mentorship and just kind
Hmm.
of helping you along the way. Can you talk about you mentioned about what a PhD could do, like for people that are like maybe thinking about it, like what doors or avenues were you able to kind of explore once you got that PhD?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that just provides you with a lot of legitimacy in a variety of circles.
Okay.
So suddenly I'm Dr. Rich Hall, and my voice has an authority that just regular Rich Hall didn't. you
Mm.
know, he had thoughts and opinions. And also, it was a pretty rigorous program. So we were a Research One institution. I got a PhD, which is different than a PsyD, which is different than like an LISW. Or these are all the designations.
For
Wait, what just
sure.
happened? Oh, hold on, my computer just did a weird thing. My apologies.
No worries.
Um, these are all different designations of degrees and credentials that you could get, but a PhD is kind of like the highest because of
Mm-hmm.
the research component. You have to learn to be a researcher, and through that, you kind of learn. And it's not, if I say it's the highest, there are some people with some PsyDs and some LISWs who are going to get a little upset with me. I apologize. I'm not trying to rank on anybody else's. It's like PhD was the first, and by virtue of that, tends to be held in the higher
Okay.
regard in more circles. PsyD is equivalent. Sometimes I wish I had gotten a PsyD because I was much more clinically focused than research focused. But it does sort of teach you how to think about information, how
Mm-hmm.
to utilize that information in a clinical setting. As I said before, there are a variety of different types of psychologists who are not clinicians. Like I said, my mentor was a social psychologist. There are research psychologists. There are neuropsychologists. So pretty wide field.
Mm-hmm.
And so also exposure to that helps you kind of figure out what do you want to be in this field because you realize you have a lot more options. I have cohort members or former colleagues who are now like working at Microsoft. I have colleagues who are working at NASA. I have colleagues
Wow.
that are working for the Navy. Like we're everywhere where people are basically doing
Mm-hmm.
a variety of different things. And everybody's not just a professor or a psychologist.
Wow. Interesting. And if you can, speaking of that, I saw when reading your bio that you are the president of Cincinnati chapter of Association of Black Psychologists. Um,
Hmm.
can you even just talk a little bit about just what that is? Like how did this come to be? Because I just
Hmm.
think it just speaks power into these are things that are happening that maybe people that look like you and I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And so the Association of Black Psychologists is an organization that was formed because there is the American Psychological Association, right?
Mm-hmm.
APA, which is essentially a group of psychologists from all around the country and the world who talk about psychological policy, psychological infrastructure, and help sort of develop the field. And unfortunately, that group was mostly white. So,
Okay.
African Americans felt like they were being excluded from boards, from committees, from leadership, and so developed the Association of Black Psychologists and so that's a national organization. And then we have local chapters. And
Mm-hmm.
Cincinnati has had a local chapter that has been pretty active for the last, I'm not gonna say 20 years because I actually saw when they incorporated. And so I feel like it's since the 80s. So it's been
Wow.
um, pretty active for a number of years. With as with all professional organizations, there's a rise and there's a fall.
Mm-hmm.
COVID hit us pretty hard, but then we started meeting virtually, and actually attendance went up when we met virtually because people could do it from their homes.
Yeah.
So we've learned to sort of adapt to the times with the group. And we've done some collaborations with nonprofit organizations in the city. We've attended like community events and done
Mm-hmm.
like I did an ask a doctor roundtable thing where people could come and just ask me psychological questions and seek advice on how to like connect with therapists and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We've done panels for other nonprofits and other panels and things like that. We hosted a convention. What was it? The Black Graduate Students in Psychology Convention. But that was way back in 2005 that we
Mm-hmm.
did that. But still, like I said, pretty active, doing a lot of things, trying to essentially promote the message of mental health and psychology to our community. Where, like as you said before, a lot of people don't know that people with my face, my demeanor, other people, Black people, are doing this work and kind of need to be sort of marketed and advertised to understand that we're out here and we're here to help.
Absolutely. And then you specialize in, like you said, African American cultural issues. If you can just break that down, what does that mean? Like if somebody's like asking you, like, what is that, like, what do you do? And what does that
Yeah.
specialty really entail?
Well, it entails essentially an understanding of how there are unique circumstances that affect African Americans as a cultural group
Mm-hmm.
that can not necessarily best be understood, but that an understanding of them is often vital to treatment.
Wow.
There's a variety of ways in which we present that is different than Caucasians are,
Mm-hmm.
or other groups are, right? And a lot of times the research wasn't done on us as a cultural group when trying to understand mental health and mental issues. And by virtue of that, sometimes we can be what we call over pathologized. So
Mm.
people will think that we're behaving ill, when in reality, we might be behaving according to systemic issues that are affecting us profoundly
Yes.
just by virtue of who we are culturally, right?
Yeah.
An example of that is, just to be black as a black male who works in, say, corporate settings or works in settings where, you have to put on the mask every day means you're going to have a different type of stress than
Mm-hmm.
your peers might. And so that's going to have physiological effects. It's going to have psychological effects. You have to be sort of in that. Be and many of us sort of who work in either corporate or these environments that aren't necessarily sensitive. I mean, there's been a lot of debate over just how black women wear their hair at work. Is it
Yes.
professional or not? Right? Like a
Yeah.
conversation that it could be the most expensive hairstyle in the office, but if it's dreads or cornrows or whatever, it would be considered inappropriate. And what does that do to the psyche when
Right.
this person's just trying to express their identity, their cultural heritage, and they are vilified for it, questioned for it? We talk about like microaggressions and things like that, these things that happen that seem small but build up every day, right?
Absolutely.
And then this person's going to be looked at as, the angry black woman because she reacts to these little slights as people ask about hair, want to touch her hair, things like that, right? The black man's going to like an angry black man if he goes off at a meeting after weeks of feeling excluded from, all the time that the buddies go to lunch. They never ask, Jamal to go to lunch.
Right.
And so he's starting to feel isolated in this environment. And then regular therapists would say, well, you're just not pushing hard enough, or, not necessarily talk with them about what the cultural aspects of what's going on within the system and to help them understand how some of this might be you, but some of this might also be the system. And
Yes.
how now can we interface with that in whatever way helps you to navigate it either more effectively, find a better system, whatever.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately, even though most therapists now are trained in like diversity and equity and inclusion, not everyone is good at it, unfortunately, because they just haven't had the experiences, haven't had to be thoughtful about it in any real way. And so one of the reasons that I think having more psychologists of color, more therapists and mental health workers of color means that there are people who are more understanding of the
Mm-hmm.
variety of issues that we face that are unique to our experience.
Yeah. I definitely thank you for that. And I look at it like with what you're doing. If you could talk about some of the myths that you often have to dispel, because like you said, there's still the hesitance, and like a lot of what I've come across is like most African Americans like are entering therapy because it's like mandated. Back in my
Mm,
younger part of my career, I was a wraparound care coordinator, and every young man I worked with, therapy was mandated. So if you can
mhm.
maybe dispel some of the myths that you often come across, in your practice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of resistance and hesitance to participate in therapy. It's looked at as like telling folks your business.
Mm,
It's looked at as, I'm here to do something to you, like I'm going to do therapy to you, not you have to be an active participant in it.
yes.
It's looked at as like soft, right? Like in the African American community, or it's looked at as I'm here to expect you to cry or to encourage you to trying to break you in some way,
Hmm.
or that I'm just like part of the system. So maybe your job sent you, and I'm going to go report back to them what you've told me. Right? There's
Wow.
there's often a lot of fear around what information do you want from me and why. For a lot of men that I see, it's just there's a lot of resistance around um, just what are you trying to make me into, right? As if
Mm,
once again I'm trying to sort of push a certain agenda to feminize them or to not have them be this sort of manly man who can take care of themselves, right? Just having to admit that you need the help by it of
yeah.
itself is like a weird thing that in
Yes.
our community there's not much room for
Hmm.
vulnerability, right? And so by virtue of that, it's just really hard for people to be okay with, can I be vulnerable?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's huge, because all of those things like I've heard young adults say to me. So and that's why I wanted to see like how like it came across. So like with that, you still have managed to have breakthroughs. So like, you know,
Yeah.
what is that rapport building like? Because to me, I mean, actually I'll take a step back. If you can explain the importance of like you know, your relationship with the client that you're working with. Like,
Mhm.
what there's a false, perception of what that power dynamic looks like.
Yeah, yeah. There's often this assumption, right, that I'm up here and they're down there, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna give them like nuggets and jewels down at them. But what often I'm trying to do is we're just here to talk about you. Like I'm not the expert in you. That's one of the
Mm.
things that when there's a concern, I always try to make sure I let them know. Like I'm just gonna ask you what's going on with you, and then you and I will kind of chop it up to figure out what's
Mm.
really at stake
Yeah.
and what are your needs. Like I'm not gonna come at you with an agenda of what I think you need to learn. I'll have my ideas, sure, because I'm a human who's making assessments over here, but I'm not going to push that on you. And so very often particularly with black men, I try to just be cool for like the first 3 sessions. I'm not pushing
Okay.
anything. Tell me what's going on with you. Tell me whatever you want to tell me. If you want to talk to me about, your video game obsession for the next 30 minutes, absolutely. I'm not going to stop you and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're here to talk about something else. One of the things that I kind of learned in rapport building that I remember a supervisor having issue with was sometimes we're just talking, just like two people just chatting
Yeah.
about things, just so you feel comfortable with
Mm-hmm.
me and not like I'm over here asking specific pointed questions that get you to a specific outcome. I mean, there will become times where, yeah, I'm going to hit you between the eyes with the truth, but I'm going to wait until you feel comfortable with me to accept that
Wow.
and you know, not just come straight out the barrel with that because that's going to scare you. That's going to get you to run away. I remember I was literally just asked last night by another therapist, it's like, how do you get black men to stick around once you get too deep with them? And
Whew.
it's like, you unfortunately can't. Like, I can't force them to come back. I wish
Yeah.
I could. I try so hard to be as, kind of gentle as I can while also
Mm-hmm.
being a little like, oh, man, I get it. I get it. It's cool. This is a safe space. But for many, that's just so anomalous. They don't have a concept of that.
Yeah.
So for them, it's hard to remain there and to want to come back to that. Why would you want to do that? And I try once again to be understanding of that and pin that. Like, this is getting weird, right? Like, you're feeling this stuff, and that's not usually where you are. But also, I'm still here. And the
Wow.
more you want to talk about it, I'm going to be available to you to talk about it. So I
And
try
that's
so hard to be as caring and as gentle as I can, but also just like feel comfortable. And if you don't, that's cool too. I might not be the best therapist for you if you
mm.
don't feel comfortable talking to me, but I want to at least give you a good experience. So
Yeah.
usually the first few sessions is always me just trying to once again build rapport, give them a good experience to where they feel comfortable, like, okay, this dude's all right.
Yeah.
And as we said, because of a lot of the stigma, many times when it's black men, they don't come without uh, uh, mother, girlfriend, wife saying you need to go. So not necessarily strictly mandated, but there are like some relationship consequences that will happen if they don't engage
Wow, that's
in
a very
treatment.
good point.
And so now I've got to be the guy I'm not representing her necessarily. Like now, once you tell me some stuff, I might be like, "Hey, man,
Mm.
that was wild. That thing you did. You knew you should have done that, right?" And I try not to do that in the first session. I try to just listen to the story. Let me get
Right.
your side. But I mean, sometimes you'll hear a wild thing. You'll be like, "What? No, that was a really bad text message." Like first, we got to set some ground rules on how you communicate.
Mm.
Yeah. But for the most part, with a lot of them, the ones that stick with me, then that's once again a biased sample. They say I felt comfortable, and because you looked like the type of therapist and you made me feel comfortable, I was comfortable continuing to do this with you, and get to those breakthroughs where they're really kind of opening up about stuff they might have never said to someone.
Yeah.
Hold on. I live on a like main thoroughfare, so very often my sessions are interrupted by sirens and
Oh wow.
motorcycles and
No
yeah,
worries.
it's a great part about living in a vital part of the city, but also just there are these interruptions that happen no matter what.
Yeah. So like
So
if
yeah,
you can
the breakthroughs happen, and very
Mhm.
often they happen in spite of what the person comes in that first time. Like, because a lot of times, brothers, they're full on closed off. They're
Yeah,
one
and it
word
sounds
answers.
like you find a way to like, okay, here's the work. Are you ready to do the work? Like it's like it sounds like you said like you build a rapport and then you develop that relationship and then it's like, okay, I know you see what I see. So like, are you
Yeah,
ready? And then that's when the
right.
the work begins. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I learned a long time ago. I worked with kids, like I said, at an orphanage for so long, and I learned if I come straight, they might not always be willing to have a conversation. But if I
Mhm.
come sideways, they're like, "Oh, okay, you're all right." And sometimes it's just we're just, like I said, we're just chatting about like, hey, what video games are you playing right now? Oh, okay, in 2K. Oh, yeah. What? I don't know anything about sports, by the way. I know video games fairly anything about sports, but it's like, oh, what team are you running? All right. You doing tournaments? Are you playing online? Like, I know enough about video games to
Yeah.
have that conversation. You doing with specific friends, or and also that's information, right? That's clinical for me. If you're playing with the
Wow.
same people every night, that means you might have close connections. They might not be available to you in your day to day, particularly in the post-COVID society.
Yeah.
But like I'm assessing that as part of the okay, this tells me they do have some, even if they feel isolated, even if they feel alone. They may talk to these people regularly, but are they really telling them what's going on? Are
Right.
those people concerned? Like everything's sort of part of the story of who a person is, and that's I'll say that's like one of my what we call case conceptualization sort of standpoints. One, I'm very big on systems, the idea that we are all nested within a variety of systems in society, and that
Okay.
understanding that understands the effect that the person is having on their immediate relationships as well as the environmental effects that are often affecting them. But also, everybody's a story, right? Like
Wow.
everything that is happening to us is part of the story of who we are. And if I can better understand that story and where does this piece slot in, what is this influencing, whatever, then I can better, help the person see their story maybe through different eyes, right? They'll see their story as say a person who wasn't strong enough to get through a variety of things that happened in their life. Then I can point out, no, actually, in each of these situations, you were resilient because you're still here, right?
Yeah.
You've survived all that stuff. It happened to you. It sucked, but you
Wow.
overcame it to get
Yeah.
this far.
See, and then talk to me about, because also sometimes we think therapy is just one way, and then
Hmm.
there's like different treatment models and things like
Yeah.
that. Like I saw you have a few different treatment models. Like how do you,
Hmm.
if you could explain that to somebody who's like maybe considering therapy, but like how do you know, because you've gained these skills and you
Yeah.
can utilize them, you know,
Mm.
how do you decide when working with somebody, oh, this may be the best route? Like I know you said from a systems perspective, and then you
Yeah.
also said, the story of people. So then how do you
Hmm.
then know this is the skill set I'm going to tap into?
Yeah. Okay. So that's hard to explain on a personal level. So, I mean, for most of us, we are trained according to a certain treatment modality, right? So, I was trained in CBT, but I also learned DBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. The idea that we have cognitions, we have behaviors, and we have feelings, and that they are, people always talk about the cognitive triangle: feelings, um, behaviors, thoughts, and that as we understand the interaction of those three, we can understand who the individual is and what choices they're making accordingly, and where the mental illness sort of tips the balance, right?
Mm,
So CBT is like one of the additional waves. Like most people think psychoanalysis, they think Freud, which is the sitting on the couch. You tell him your dreams, and then he tells you what your subconscious is telling you.
right.
Cognitive behavioral therapy kind of took it out of that sort of black box thinking to no, there's this interaction effect that's happening between these three aspects of the self, and if we can better understand those, train people to develop, say, behavioral strategies versus cognitive strategies, while managing their feelings, then we can essentially help them to overcome some of the challenges they might be facing, right?
Hmm.
So CBT is that. DBT is built on CBT, but like there's this dialectic that's happening. People have the emotion mind and the reasonable mind, this idea that our heart and our mind are often in conflict, and
Yes.
that if we can get them to work together, we have what's called the wise mind, right? That's that part of the mind that knows that there's a lot of feelings involved, but also what needs to be done, right? That
Yes.
this is going to take some work and we have to commit on the long term. Feelings are very hot, immediate, and they want action now. But the mind, the reasonable mind, is often very like long term oriented, organized. We can take as much time as we need. And
Hmm.
when we're in that wise mind space, we are sort of balancing those two in a way that allows us to feel like, okay, I know what I'm talking about. Very often, when thinking about the wise mind, it's when you have to give advice to a close family member or friend. It's going to be hard to hear this, right? There's an emotional component here, but also this is the best advice that you should need to hear, right?
Yeah.
That's often a wise mind talking to others. Problem is, it's hard to tap into that untrained with ourselves, right?
Hmm.
We have what I call emotional landmines around us all the time that cause us to get into our emotions and then unable to even think what a good solution might be.
Right.
And that's why I often tell people, like, I don't know. When I ask a question about something, they go, I don't know. It's like, I don't know is an emotional answer. Your reasonable mind knows. Like, If I don't have the information, I can find.
Wow.
If I give myself time to think, I'll get there, right? But your heart goes, well, I don't see an answer right now, so it might not be one. So I just don't know.
Yes. Wow. That's and you hear that in conversations a lot, especially like, working with young adults is like that's like
Yes.
okay, that's part of my beginning to exit. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So I used to say when I worked with kids, two of the biggest lies kids ever tell you is I don't know and I don't care. Right? Like that. I've decided to stop thinking about this as a conversation, so I'm checking out. And it's like,
Yes.
but no, like if we sit here for a minute, you got to give me something. Like
Mhm.
why did you decide to punch your sister? I don't know. No, I mean, what was it like? Were you mad and then you
Mhm.
wanted retaliation and now it's a fight, right? Like, or do you really not know? Because how could you not know? You engaged, right?
Yeah.
But very often, young people aren't necessarily taught to think through how their feelings affect behaviors, right? And how where does that train start, and where can you stop it before it gets too far, and now you've committed some egregious action. And so, the idea that we need to teach more emotional intelligence and things like that, so that people better understand
Yeah.
why they behave the way they do, why they think the way they do, and by virtue of that, be able to divert or shift or whatever. And so, to answer your original question, because I realize I've said a whole lot, not necessarily answered that. In the moment, there's often these sort of cues that I know I read well
Okay.
as a person who's been doing this for a long time. One of my like fundamental aspects of me, and some people have it and they don't choose to be me, like they don't choose to be a therapist, but I'm just good at reading people,
Mhm.
just by virtue of a variety of different factors in my life and just once again training. But I feel like I came into the field with some innate ability of like, wait, people, I
Wow.
kind of see things in people that they might not fully understand about themselves, or just I can read the subtext of who a person is. And so in that reading, there's a part of my brain that's like, oh, try this approach. Oh, try that. And sometimes there's a flow to it when it's a really good client. We have a rapport, things are going well. It's just natural just to keep like, oh, just I'm going to ask this type of question. I'm also a person who was very good at assimilating a lot of information. So I don't always use the right terms, but and once
Mm.
again, being a black male, I had to learn how to like say this in a different language. Like sometimes I can use the King's English, but sometimes people aren't listening if I use all the words that I
Yes.
know. Right. And so I've got to be able to adapt to the language of the people I'm talking to some degree. Like I'm gonna talk a little loftier because PhD, but I just got to be able to bring it down, particularly like I'm working with kids. I can't use all these words.
Yeah.
Um, and so, you know, I have to be able to translate this concept quickly to try and explain it to them so that they feel connected to it and understand what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Right. And so I do that, and it happens kind of, it's literally happening in the dynamic. Just
Wow.
as a quick aside about that, I remember when we switched over, COVID happened, we switched over to video. I
Mhm.
was lost for like the first month
Okay.
because I didn't realize how much nonverbal information I was picking up off of people. So to get only
Wow.
this much information from a person and
Yeah.
try and read them the way I had been doing for like at that point like 6 or 7 years, or actually longer. At that point it was like maybe 10, 11 years in my career, to suddenly only have this
Wow. It took
was,
some of the tools away.
it took a lot away.
Wow.
I had to reacclimate to, what am I like? And then suddenly, what am I doing with my own body over here? Because they can't see me, but now I'm not getting as much information. So now I'm more fidgety than I've ever been in therapy before, because
Wow.
I'm just out of my element and I'm not getting the same cues.
Mhm.
And had to acclimate to just virtual therapy. And then when we went back, had to reacclimate to reading the full body again.
Yes.
And now doing a hybrid of both, it's like I've got a good handle on it largely, but still the fidgety thing is still like a personal rich struggle that's happening. Like I've got clickers over here, I've got things over here that just I'm gonna do this to operate, keep my hands going.
Yeah.
I was doing card tricks, like I was learning all kinds of things in COVID. I've got figurines that I move around just because it's just different. Like I'm not that fidgety when it's a person in the room, but on
Yeah.
virtual, ugh, it's
And
just too limiting.
that's fascinating because I remember even me personally having to go virtual with my therapist, and then
Hmm.
the moment we can go back to in person, it was like, okay, so when do you want to do this in person thing? Like, so yeah, I just appreciate that perspective of, coming
Yeah.
from that angle. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and I remember the big struggle with it because I remember in the field, literally like 4 years ago, they were like, people are considering virtual therapy. Absolutely not. Like most therapists were like completely against it. And then a
really?
pandemic happened, and everyone had to shift if you still wanted money coming in, right?
Wow.
So there was suddenly this like mass transition. I'm pretty sure like Dell sold the most computers they had ever sold that year. and Logitech was making so much money
Oh
off
my
cameras
goodness.
because suddenly all of us needed them, and it
Yes,
was just a great time in those industries. Like if you had known to buy stock, I hope you got your stock
for
in Dell,
sure, for
HP,
sure.
and Logitech,
Yeah,
and Blue microphones because those went off the shelves too.
they
So
really did. They really did. So, like, speaking of microphones, I also see that you have a podcast of your own. Um,
yes,
if you can just talk to me a little bit about that, Psychologize You. I love the
yes.
name. I came across. I'm like, "Oh, I gotta know. First, how did you come up with the title? It's just, I believe in simplicity, but it's more to that. Like
Yes,
I'm a hip hop guy, so I'm like, that's a double entendre. So
right,
yeah, talk
right,
to me a little bit about
right.
that.
Right. Also a hip hop guy, so very much 90s hip hop.
Yes.
I remember being just random rich thing. I remember being so frustrated that Wu-Tang Clan all came up with such good names, right? Like
Come
they're
on.
how do you do that? Like how do you come up with like 18 different awesome
Yes.
names? Now that I've watched Wu Saga, I've seen like, oh, okay, there was a process to that. But I mean, come
Yes.
on, Method Man, Inspector Deck, like, and so coming from that era,
Mm-hmm.
you had to come correct. And that's one of the things that I like is magnificent about Black Twitter. It's like there's always these people who come up with great Twitter handles,
Oh
and I'm
my
super
goodness.
jealous. Like, I don't know what to call myself day to day,
Yeah.
but you guys come up with a new one every week, right?
Yes.
And so every time, so I didn't say this earlier. I'm a little ADHD, so I'm always having like ventures and whatnot. And so podcasting was literally just stuck in the house, nowhere to
Mm-hmm.
go. But I still want to talk to people and interact. Once again, I want to dispense some of this information,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm going to learn how to do a podcast. And did one with my wife for a little while that was called the Hall Space Podcast. We were just talking about like movies and comics and family stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then was like, actually, I want to do like a heavy psychology one where I'm kind of teaching people concepts about psychology. And got with a friend of mine, Frank Baker, who was actually started graduate school with me way back in 2005. It was like, hey, do you want to do this thing with me?
Yeah.
And we can go on and do some shows and just teach people these psychological concepts. And so just came up, the name was literally, what do I call a psychology podcast? I remember I was at a dinner party with a friend and we were playing some game and I don't remember what exactly happened. But she said, you're trying to psychologize me.
Yes.
The first time I'd
Yes.
heard that word, and I was like, no, I'm not. But because usually when people know that I do this for a living, that's what immediately they think I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to psychologize it. So, or I'm trying to, read their mind or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was coming up with the podcast name, I was talking to my wife about it, and I was like, you know what, I should call it Psychologize Me. I should call it Psychologize You because it's
Yeah.
Psychologize You, and it's also like Psychologize University. Like,
Absolutely.
all right. So that's like a perfect, like, in the internet age and the post Apple Google age, you got to come up with something that's just catchy and
Mm-hmm.
interesting and completely unique. And kind of knew I had a good one when I stumbled back into that thought.
Yeah.
What do I call this? Psychologize You. Oh, yeah, no, that'll be hot.
Yes.
You can put that on a logo.
For sure.
And also, I have a background I have some background in graphic design. I'm not great at it, but by virtue of some of my other interests, I have like a lot of artist friends. So I hit up an artist friend and was like, can you make me a logo? I
Mm-hmm.
want it to look like a university seal and say psychologize you. And we're going to put know thyself in the logo and in Latin. And like I said, background in graphic design. So I just come up with ideas like this.
Yeah.
And then like hired some people on Fiverr to make some music for it. And then was like, let's make some shows. Um, and was doing that. So I did like, I think like 12 episodes of that. And
Mm-hmm.
then started actually went from my university job where I had a ton of free time to starting my own business. And the podcast had to like move to the side of it so I could
Mm-hmm.
make some actual money. And one of the things that I'm actually talking with some people about now is like reinvigorating getting some more episodes out because I do like doing that. I like doing long form content like this where I get to like not just give a digestible chunk of information, but just like talk through what this stuff
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and I think it definitely comes through, and through just what you're doing on TikTok, and like just hearing your story and about the way you approach, your work. Like there's a discipline to it, like you said, achieving that status of PhD and what that means and how it's elevated with what you do. So um, can't let you get out of here without, like you said, you're a hip hop guy, as am I. So part of what we do before we conclude the show is if you can pinpoint a song, I call it dope songs that change your life. maybe
Oh
it
no.
didn't change your life, but it impacted you in a way that, like, you know what it is. You hear that song, you know where you were, who
Uh
you
huh.
were with. If you
Uh
could
huh.
dig into that bag and let me know what's one of those songs for you.
Oh God. The hard part is choosing one
Okay,
song.
okay. You can give me
It's
top
so hard to
three
choose one song.
if that's
Top
easier.
three.
Yeah.
Okay, we could do "Sun God" by Common, which is
Yes.
a high tech song.
Woo.
I was in undergrad, and I remember me and my now wife girlfriend were walking up to a Black Student Union function,
Okay.
and the guy pulls out a little a little stereo, sets it on the ground, and just starts playing that. And that's the first time anybody had heard that. Like we're in Cincinnati, so
Ooh.
high tech was big here, and then you
Yes.
just get that drop of dum dum dum
Yeah.
oh dum dum oh, and it was like, what is this? And then Common drops in with his verse, and it's like, oh no.
Oh
Now for the
man.
rest of my life, I will remember standing on UC's campus in the Commons next to my girlfriend, hearing that song come on for the very first time.
That is
I think it's
awesome.
that seminal point in my life. And the other one I would say is The Grind Date by De La Soul,
Mm.
featuring MF Doom. And I was standing at a concert with my wife again. At that point, she was my wife. Most
Mm.
Def was like an hour late because
Oh
Most
wow.
Def will come out late sometimes when he's by himself. He was
Yeah.
so late, I remember. And then he comes out and he says, "Have y'all listened to this De La Soul album? Go get the Grind Date album. I'm gonna play y'all some cuts." And then he
What?
drops the opening to Grind Date at the concert, and it like I have never like it's one of those seminal hip hop. That was one of the greatest moments of all time, even though he's
Yes.
doing something else's song. I'm already at a high from watching Mos Def in concert by himself.
Yeah.
He was doing oh crap, what's that album? Oh, Blackjack Johnson, the Blackjack album.
Oh, jeez
What it's called?
Louise. New no, is it New Danger?
Um, uh, I'm now going to look it up because my
That's
brain
okay.
won't let
I'm
me.
with you. I'm with you.
It wasn't. Was it? No, it wasn't the Aesthetic because I never saw him when he did
No,
the
it wasn't
Aesthetic.
the Ecstatic.
I can see the face of the album. New Danger. It was New
Yes, New
Danger. You were
Danger.
correct.
Yes. Okay.
New Danger
I'm a Mose
because he
guy.
came out in the hat and the black leather,
Yes.
and then he's jumping up and down the De La Soul, and I'm
Come
like losing
on.
my mind. And now, like that's my wake up ringtone is the opening to
Wow.
what's his name? Opening to Grind Date. Like that song is forever in my lexicon.
See, that's
Um,
awesome.
and then the last song that I will say, since you gave me the opportunity to do
Yes.
three, um, my favorite rapper of all time is now Fonte Coleman of Little
Woo,
Brother.
talk to me. Yes,
Yeah,
Vontae.
and his latest album, which was I'm blanking on the name because you asked me.
His
Um,
latest solo or the Foreign
yeah, his
Exchange?
latest solo one, I believe. And I'm trying to remember the song while we're talking about it, and I'm gonna blank on it. But like literally his entire catalog, he is what I call like one of the best of adult rap. Like I'm 45,
Oh, for
I can't be rapping
sure.
about shooting people and drugs anymore. Like to
Yeah.
me, it just does not resonate. I have a job, I have kids, I got
Yeah.
a mortgage, I got life insurance, and he's a guy who raps about that stuff in a way that I just resonate with, and I literally drop him a lot of times. There's a line where he says, a well-oiled machine doesn't grind. And I'm like, I use that in therapy. Like,
Yeah.
you could be grinding, but a well-oiled machine doesn't grind. So you need some self-care in there so that you
Yeah.
don't grind to a halt, right? Um, and I'm trying to remember the name of the
I'm
song, but
because
there is
yeah, I know Charity Starts at Home was one of my favorite.
is the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, that
No News
yeah.
is Good News is the second one, right?
Oh yes, I forgot that album was yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so that's my guy. Like of all the rappers in the world that I ever want to have a conversation with, he's top. Like if I could get him on my podcast,
Oh
by
my
I'd
goodness.
stop making podcasts forever. I've had a conversation with Fonte.
Yeah, because he's definitely has that different mind and like
Right,
so severely underrated as an MC. Like it's like
severely.
if you don't understand, it's like you really don't understand. Like yeah,
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 right, right, right. And so yeah, very much my all-time favorite, one of my all-time favorite rappers. And I'm blanking on the name of the song that I literally do all the time. Um, I'm Not Here Anymore is probably that was my other ringtone for
yeah.
like 5 years was I'm Not Here Anymore off the first album, Charity Starts at Home. But yeah,
Yeah.
so
He's phenomenal. See, this is great, and I want to definitely let you know, Doc, you're welcome back at on a Dope Public podcast anytime. Um,
oh, I'm having a good time. Anytime you'd like to have me or ask a question, man, it's been fun.
for sure. So, like, if you want to leave folks with how they can support you, where they can catch some of your work and things like that, how can people find Dr. Ritch Hall?
Yes, Dr. Ritch Hall is available on the intranets at psychworksclinicllc.com. You can also see me on TikTok at Psychworks Clinic. I'm on Instagram as Psychworks Clinic LLC. So I'm also on Facebook as Psychworks Clinic LLC. So any of those spaces, you'll see me. Psychworksllc.com, the website is where you can catch up with me if you want to like schedule a session of therapy. I am licensed in the state of Ohio, but also have what's called a PsyPAC contract, which allows me to see people in other states,
Awesome.
as well as I do some life coaching. If you're not interested in the full therapy thing, you want to just do life coaching, you can connect with me on psychworksllc.com. But if you just want to watch some videos where I talk about psychology stuff and, dispense positive information on the internet, just catch me on TikTok, catch me on Instagram, catch me on the Facebook, where I try my best to move the needle on positivity in the Black community.
Fantastic. And you're definitely doing that. So just want to thanks again. And thank you all for listening. This has been Adult Public Health Podcast with love, respect, and advocacy. Peace.
4 seconds, a teacher will begin to speak.
I think very deeply.